I'd like to thank everyone for coming to our second edition of Campaign School, which is a very informal, a workshop-type series in which we focus on a range of campaigns, both individuals running for public office, all three levels, but also campaigns that don't actually involve running for office, that are either advocacy or issues-based, and that it's really meant to be a forum in which we analyze and dissect all the necessary ingredients, the successes, the mistakes, all the dynamics of engaging in political life as individuals, as organizations across the board. And as part of the mandate, we wanted to invite both our local politicians, but also other people who are active in campaigns so they can be accessible and respond to questions from members of the Academy and of our group. And so we're really grateful that Andrew Cash, who's the Member of Parliament for Davenport, both the riding that Emily and I live in, but also the riding here at the Academy is in, has been gracious enough to be our first guinea pig when it comes to guests here in Campaign School. So I did want to start really with your background. And when I participated in a public forum you held on lawful access, I heard you make a joke about how life on the road as a musician kind of parallels the life of a politician in terms of both having to travel to Ottawa, but also being in the public eye a lot. Was there a point as a young person, was there a point at an early age when you decided that you were political and that you wanted to engage your society in a way that was not passive, but allowed you to feel that you were making a difference?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here, and not to sound too cliched, but that is an excellent question. Because the answer is quite simply yes. I grew up in a sort of lower middle class neighborhood of bungalows in Scarborough, in a very large Catholic family, 7 siblings, sorry, and for anyone who maybe has that background, or for those who don't. It may come as a surprise to some that in the 1970s, as a kid, and into the 80s, there was sort of two very strong messages that you were raised with if you had the background that I did, and the two strong messages were, one was as a Catholic you would be very much against abortion, and then the other very strong message, and they were basically it was a message that was as strong, which was the message of social justice, which was a message of economic justice, which was a message of that it was in part your responsibility to play a role in changing the economic system, to changing the social structures, to make life fairer for everyone, but in particular for marginalized people, in particular for people who are at the bottom end of the social economic scale. Now, I don't want to get into a huge discussion about what's happened in the church, but it's kind of obvious to say that one narrative has kind of become the dominant narrative, and the narrative that really attracted and inspired me, which was the message of systemic change in the pursuit of a fairer social and economic structure, became more the dominion of more political, non-religious necessarily movements like social democracy, so my formation as an activist comes from, and people are surprised sometimes to hear this, but comes from my experience being raised as a Catholic in an era where social justice was basically the one of the things you had to sign on to if you were going to do this gig. That was just basically it. And so some of my earliest memories of sort of activism would have been going on marches against Canada's involvement in the cruise missile testing, for example, when I was in high school. So this would have been organized by my religion teacher in my high school. And so, and at the same time, that was happening, the Clash were coming out with, with London Calling and then Sandinista. And in fact, I remember when that record came out, and we were studying liberation theology in religion class, and what that was, one of the more famous quotes from that era, and I can't remember who said it, but we can find that out. Maybe Mark can check this one out. Which is, when I give money or charity to the poor, people call me a saint. When I ask why there's poverty, people call me a communist. And that kind of narrative from essentially, as I say, people who were connected to the church in Latin America was a big part of what we talked about in my high school. And at the same time, we were listening to the Clash. So it was kind of like this explosive combination of two very powerful energies, rock and roll and religion, but I think what I would say now is rock and roll and social justice, because I think that you obviously, I don't want to get into a discussion about religion and well, yeah.
But one could certainly reclaim that, although it's interesting that because there wasn't really a home for you in the church to be that radical, that music provided that home. That music ended up being the basis for you to continue to pursue that social justice, and to do so in a way that wasn't contradictory, in the way that punk rock, for example, successfully harmonized politics and music in a way that clearly allowed you to come of age in a very important way and on your own terms.
Well, that's right. And then as I moved into the music industry, then there were other issues around how to harmonize my political instincts and interests and my essentially my passion and perhaps you can call it a vocation. There was, then you get into other issues there. But it's true that for me as a teenager, this vessel of punk rock, which some people ask me today, well, how do you square the circle, of the anarchy of punk rock and you being a politician? But I never really glommed onto the anarchy side of punk rock. I glommed on to the political side of it, to the engagement side of it. I never really subscribed to the anarchist credo of not really getting involved in the systems that essentially run things. And in fact, I'm skipping forward a bit, but one of the reasons that I decided to make the jump into partisan politics was exactly because the neoconservative movement that has sort of swamped North America has been very good at inspiring volunteers. They've been very good at raising money. They've been very good at knowing, while on the one hand saying that government is the problem, they've been very good at really understanding how you gain control of the reins of government. And I saw a tweet during the municipal election here in Toronto where someone had said, for every volunteer that Rob Ford has knocking on doors, there's 4 hipsters in cafes grumbling and complaining about Rob Ford. And that to me is, to each other, right. And that to me is exactly the issue that sort of pushed me to make that next step was that I feel like we do need to engage in the system, and that being cool is not, you know, the final word, right? I mean, being cool is not enough. And also, as you know, I spent 15 years as a journalist at Now Magazine, and I also, you know, realized in myself that I just couldn't just observe anymore.
And I'm curious, you drew one sort of contrast with sort of the anarcho side of punk, and you mentioned casually some of the contradictions in the music industry that certainly make it difficult sometimes to be political. Did you ever have, not just with the industry, but with other musicians, the types of debates where you're trying to convey to them why they should be political, why they should perform at a rally, that they might say, no, man, I'm just interested in the music, I don't want to get into the politics? Did that come up? Was there tension in terms of some of your musician friends who perhaps didn't understand why you were also so political?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair to say that Canada has not a long tradition of political rock and roll actors or performers, you know, people who are, you know, well, for example, I'm sure you all remember that picture in the front of the Star, I think, or the Globe, of Gordon Lightfoot at the Occupy Toronto. And I said to my friends, well, that's amazing. It took him, you know, 45 years, but that's just amazing, right? You know, but really, it wasn't until we got into the post-punk era that we started to see that sort of activism that you see in the United States, that you certainly see in the UK. But when I first started to, you know, become more of a full-time musician, was right around the same time that the music industry was starting to consolidate. So bigger labels were buying smaller labels, and they were seeking to find ways to cut costs, so they were inviting corporate sponsors into the action, and this was sort of anathema to rock and roll, right? And this was it seemed to me sacrilegious that you know, your concert would be sponsored by a beer company, and so and while I say this, it sounds so quaint and naive at this point, but in the mid '80s, it to me just seemed just so wrong. So yeah, I definitely engaged in debate with my colleagues on that, and wrote publicly on it, and it didn't necessarily help my career that much. And of course, what we see today is that conversation's over, and there's a number of reasons why that conversation's over, but over it certainly is.
There's a bunch of seats up front, and there's chairs just over by the side if you want to set them up. It was interesting, Andrew, where you talked about your desire to become involved in party politics as a desire to make a difference, as a desire to not allow the other side of the political spectrum to have a free show, to have a free ride, to be able to, on the one hand, take over government, while on the other hand, gut it completely. When you got involved in party politics, had you already decided that you wanted to run for office, or was it more you wanted to get involved in a larger way to have an impact? I mean, was it a conscious, I want to be an MP or an MPP, or was it, you know, I'm going to start hanging around with these folks, and after that you started realizing, you know, this is something I could do?
Well, I made this decision that somehow I wanted to be more involved in the partisan part. And for those who just come in, part of the reason for that decision was because I saw, and certainly see today, that the neoconservative movement is very good at taking the reins of government and then trying to eviscerate it, and that we on the progressive side needed to take the system more seriously, and that it was not helpful for our cause to essentially say, oh, all politics is bad, the system's broken. You know, I mean, my conclusion was we are that system. So, and I know it sounds slightly melodramatic to say it like this, but we are the system, whether we like it or not. So what happened for me was, you know, and again, I identified as a rock and roll musician, and even as a journalist, I identified as a rock and roll musician. And so, one of the things about this particular group of people is it's like we're not real joiners, you know. Like it's not like we want to get into a club unless it's our band, and if it's our band, that means no one else can join the club, and so that's not so. So I put a small toe into the pond when Jack Layton first, you know, when he entered the leadership contest in 2003. I was very much in support of that. I thought at the time that the NDP, and in fact Canadian politics, needed a strong voice from our city, from Toronto, and that it was time for the NDP to be that urban voice. And you know, I'd interviewed Jack a number of times for Now magazine, and of course he was incredibly accessible to us, and so I joined the party, the NDP, to help in that leadership, in his pursuit of the leadership. And I didn't do a heck of a lot. I remember, you know, going over to Jack and Olivia's house for an organizing meeting and feeling very odd because I was still I'm still a writer, and of course Now magazine has never hidden its partisan persuasions, and I've always appreciated that about them, because I don't think it's really possible to be completely and utterly nonpartisan. But I went there, and I was part of a group of people who were trying to help out, and it wasn't comfortable for me. It wasn't an easy thing for me to do, and I think part of it definitely had to do with my self-identification with sort of. I think I have to say it this way, that I just felt like I was too cool for this. You know,
well, you're the rock and roller around a bunch of political squares, right? I mean, how were they treating you? I mean, were they
with some amount of bemusement, I think, and but you know, Jack was, if anyone had ever met him personally, and certainly everyone knew who he was and how he. How he communicated with people, but he was incredibly open to people from the arts and culture sector. I think that was something that you had. He was a downtown city councillor, and if you're a downtown city councillor, if you're not hooked in with the arts and culture sector, then who knows what the hell you're doing, but you're not really doing your job. But for him it was really natural, and as we all know, he played music, and he was constantly trying to get Charlie, Angus, and I and him in a studio together or on a stage together playing music. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time with him to do that, which is really one of the many regrets and sadness around his early death. But anyway, I didn't do a lot on that campaign. I went to a couple meetings trying to get housing people in the co-op housing sector to support Jack's leadership. I at the time lived in a co-op housing, and I still think it's an excellent housing model for cities, and so I did that. I didn't do a lot. But and it did seem to me, politics and partisan politics, that it was kind of like, okay, here I am here, and I want to get involved, and there's like some kind of veil around it, and I can see it over there, but I can't find the way to open the drape to get in, but I see it there, and it doesn't seem very far from me, but I just don't feel quite like I'm in that yet. That's the way it felt. And so, you know, I continued writing for Now Magazine. We're talking 2003, and spent much. I started to do that a little more frequently, and I started to follow the partisan part of it more, you know, more closely than I had before.
And what allowed that veil to either be lifted or allow you to feel that you could literally run for office? And I ask this because part of, I think, your success is how early you started doing it, and how physical and material the canvassing was that allowed you, both in terms of, you know, cash for TO as a way to sort of present yourself as someone who would champion Toronto's interest, but here in the riding, I mean, I really think even before, and granted the federal election, that period of federal elections, there was always uncertainty as to when one would come.
That's right.
But nonetheless, you seem to have a real head start of introducing yourself to the riding in a way that I don't think's ever been done in this riding, but certainly is not typical in terms of the top-down politics that generally occurs at the federal level.
Yeah, well, that really comes from my experience playing music. So when you decide, you know, at a young age or at any age that you want to be, you know, a singer-songwriter, a rock and roll singer, and you want to get a band together, you want to make it in the, you know, in music, you don't think about the practicalities of it, right? You don't think about the fact that, you know, no one, you know, you're not going to make it, you know. You don't think about that at all. You know, you end up in some, you know, some strange way, you end up getting this idea in your head that your band is the best band on the planet. And then you act accordingly, right? And so you just organize your life around that, and you don't think about, you know, an RRSP or buying a house or, you know, or getting an MBA. You don't think about any of that stuff. You think about, okay, what do we need? Well, we need a van so we can get to the gig in Vancouver. You know, you think about the practical nuts and bolts, and it's about being inspired by an ideal. It really is. It's not about anything other than that. And I just took that approach to this decision. I just decided that, well, if I was going to do this, the only way I knew how to do something like this was to do it all the way, and to do it because I believed that this was the right thing for me to do. And so there is a practical element to this, because, you know, whereas when I wanted to be in a rock and roll band, I was 15, you know, I decided to run for the NDP, and well, I got the nomination in October of 2009, so I was, you know, 48, and I had 3 kids, and when I was 15, I was 15. So there was some calculations there that had to be made, and you know, I guess I have a partner who's as willing to go out on a limb as I am, and I also had, you know, and disclosure, because I, you know, I couldn't have done this if I was completely and utterly broke, right? And this is something that this was a revelation for me, because you know, I'd been doing music for television, and, you know, I had some shows that were doing well on TV, so I had a bit more space to work a lot harder on this, and it is a huge problem in our system that you have to have some financial resources to do it at least the way I did it, you know, and I think this is...
In terms of how long that you were able to take,
that's right,
doing the canvassing and building the infrastructure on the riding.
Yeah, that's right. Well, to be able to free up some of my time to do that, yeah. But so that, you know, just so leaving that aside, yeah, I went out and started knocking on doors in November of 2009, and I'd never knocked on I'd never canvassed
Was it scary?
Ever. It was, yeah, it totally was. And the weird thing is that, I had conversations with folks in the NDP, and one of my oldest friends is Charlie Angus, who's a member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay, and we talked a lot about this, and for somehow the conversation around door knocking never ever came up. And I don't know if that was they were intentionally not mentioning it or what. But I kept hearing from folks, okay, when are you starting to door knock? And I'm like, what are you talking about? But I started to, and pretty much in the first night, and it's funny because like when I'm going anywhere in the riding, I run this memory loop in my head. Okay, yeah, we did that, and we went back down.
Do you remember exactly where you started?
Yeah, we did. I do. This first street that I knocked on doors was Concord, from Bloor down to College. It was one night, and I didn't have a clue at what I was doing. But again, this felt very similar to being in a band where I had to present myself and treat people with respect and let the chips fall where they may. But I did discover that actually that I just simply enjoyed the interaction, and I understood that sometimes people would just, I'm at their door and they have problems with something, and I'm there, and it's probably got nothing to do with me. It's not a federal issue, but I'm there, and they've never had anyone there before, right? And
can you talk a bit about that physical connection? I mean, you hear so much in politics these days about Twitter and social media, but it strikes me that it is really about that local, physical, human connection that you're able to make with enough voters who maybe some are motivated enough to volunteer, but others are at least motivated enough to go to the ballot box and vote. Did you feel that was a key dynamic of being able to spend that time to make all those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're in an era where, obviously we can communicate at lightning speed in ways that we'd never, ever imagined before. And, the initial way that polling used to be done was that people would go out and knock on doors and ask questions, and then they'd bring all the data back and they'd compile it, right? Well, that's sort of what we were doing. And I continue to do it, continue to do this. Nothing can take the place of that sort of interaction, I believe. Part of it is just a human thing, but people don't answer their phones, or people don't have landlines, or people aren't on Facebook and Twitter still, that people have language issues, or and this is the one that I think is the most significant, people just don't have the time. And so if you show up at their door, oftentimes, actually, I've been just kind of very surprised at how appreciative people are. That, you think, like, because imagine yourself, you're cooking dinner and the doorbell rings, it's like, what the hell is this? Who could this be? It's got to be someone who's selling me something, Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, what's even worse is when you knock on the door and they're expecting a flower delivery, or a food or a pizza delivery, right? And I'm not that guy, and so you really and then the worst is actually when you ring the doorbell and someone answers the door and says, "You just woke my baby up." That's when you say, "Hi, well, I'm from the Liberal Party," and